Alrighty, we're going to start. My name is Paul Creaney from Massachusetts Fiscal Alliance. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is a virtual press conference with 5 of the 6 New England states present. We have nonprofit organizations here and legislators from every state. I do want to give one slight disclaimer is that some of these states are in session as we speak, and some of these states have important bills. So I know we have one lawmaker from Maine who hopes to join, but she may be actually speaking about a bill before her for her district as we speak. So it's the nature of politics. Sometimes things happen, but regardless, we are coming together as a New England coalition to talk about what ratepayers are experiencing with their bills. This is something that is impacting every New England state, and the focus of today's call is to talk about how the ratepayers are feeling the squeeze for the mandates that are driven in these states. We are now paying for the transition net zero. And it is April Fool's Day, and we want to remind ratepayers, do not be fooled by what you hear from your state house politicians. The reason why your bills are getting jacked up right now is not because of tariffs, not because of natural gas, not because of who occupies the White House, but it's because of these mandates, these green renewable mandates, these alternate energy mandates, which are driving up costs because we are funding the transition, and it will continue to get worse. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to New Hampshire. We're going to go through all the different states, and then we're going to do question and answer at the end. And we hope to be done by 11 o'clock. So thank you for joining, and New Hampshire.
Thank you, Paul. My name is Greg Moore. I'm with Americans for Prosperity. And if New England was Sesame Street, New Hampshire would be the segment of one of these kids is not like the other. New Hampshire is zigging when the rest of the region is zagging. We are emphasizing state competitiveness and ratepayer concern over political agendas. And that's the reason why we have one of the fastest growing economies in the nation, as well as one of the fastest growing states as far as inbound migration in the nation. And that's being led by a lot of people, both in the academic side as well as leadership in the New Hampshire legislature. So I'm going to throw it over to Drew Klein from the Josiah Bartlett Center, who's been really leading the effort in bringing up and raising a lot of the issues focusing on energy policy in New Hampshire.
Thanks, Greg. I think leading off with New Hampshire here is great because we are the odd one out in New England by holding to the idea that free markets actually work, and they work in electricity and energy just like they do everywhere else. I want to highlight something that was in our report that this coalition group did that we released last fall, which is that New Hampshire, because it doesn't have the extreme mandates that the rest of the New England states have, has contributed to keeping energy costs in New England a bit lower than they otherwise would have been. Our study found that New Hampshire saves New England ratepayers $56.5 million by not mandating these more extreme policies, such as mandating the electrification of home heating and transportation sectors. And again, that's because we do have some mandates in New Hampshire. We have a renewable portfolio standard, et cetera, but we don't go as far as the other New England states do. And that's because, again, New Hampshire sort of believes in markets. And it gets back to this whole point of why does government mandate particular technologies? The only motivation to mandate a particular use of a particular technology is because the people in government believe that that technology is not viable in the market otherwise. In other words, those technologies are not financially optimal in a competitive market, which means they cost more. So if the market wouldn't otherwise use those technologies and you're mandating that the market use them, then you are driving up costs. And when you mandate technologies that aren't really dispatchable 100% of the time, that aren't reliable when the wind's not blowing or it's not sunny outside, then you're increasing the risk of blackouts, and you're decreasing grid reliability as well. So we're paying more for electricity that's less reliable, and that's a really bad way to do things. New Hampshire does it better, and we hope that all the rest of the New England states would follow our lead. And now we'll turn it over to House Majority Leader Jason Osborne from New Hampshire at this point.
Hey, good morning. This is a great topic to be speaking to you about from the free state of New Hampshire. We do things a little differently here than the rest of the New England states. We actually prioritize the things that our constituents care about. That is to say, affordability and reliability of energy, rather than trying to create some kind of, our own version of the Green New Deal. Over the past few years, we've taken a number of steps to provide relief to ratepayers. As Drew mentioned, we do have some mandates here, but we kind of work around it by like taking those mandates and then rebating those monies back to the ratepayers. So we're doing that with the RGGI funds, and we're going to be doing that with the RPS funds as well. We've eliminated the electricity consumption tax. We've put the kibosh on biomass subsidies, and we're leading the way to kill the Transportation and Climate Initiative. So, it's not like we don't care about the rest of New England, but you guys have some kind of expensive tastes, and we're just not interested in participating. So that's why we're taking the steps to try to decouple ourselves entirely from the ISO New England grid. We've filed legislation this year, passed it out of the House to reduce regulations on new energy production facilities. There's so much demand on the horizon when it comes to crypto mining, AI. These data center needs are exploding, and we need to figure out how to get prepared for that. And that's what New Hampshire is doing. And the great news is technology is going to solve this for us going into the future. But Drew mentioned we need to allow the market to make that happen. We need to not be spending taxpayer dollars malinvesting in alternatives that just are not ready for prime time, if they ever will be. And we will continue to work to make sure that the lights stay on for our citizens, and that their wallets do not get hit by these disastrous policies such as we're seeing in these other states. So for the rest of my friends in New England, talk to your politicians, let them know that it's their mandates that are causing these skyrocketing prices. And if they don't listen to you, you're welcome up here. Be like the rest of the residents of New Hampshire, and migrate from your state to the free state of New Hampshire, and we will welcome you with open arms, and love to see you. So thank you, Paul, for putting this event together, and thank you very much.
All right, Rob Roper from Vermont.
I thank you, Paul. We're very much different from New Hampshire and Vermont. We have fully embraced the Green New Deal principles and are moving forward at a fast clip. I would guess the fastest clip of any of the New England states. Although maybe this press conference will disabuse me of that notion. But it not only costs our citizens a lot of out-of-pocket money to pay the higher electric bills, but it's also costing us a lot of jobs. I mean, I've seen a number of manufacturing companies in Vermont, and we don't have a lot left, that have left specifically because of the electric rates. One down in Springfield a couple of years ago. We just had a company in Georgia, Vermont, that left because of the regulatory environment, which I very much assume includes electricity regulation. I have a friend of mine who's a former CEO of a manufacturing company in Colchester, and they do business in a number of states. And he told me, we're not ever going to expand in Vermont because of the electricity rates. So, I've had politicians on the other side say, hey, we have some of the lowest electric rates in New England, to which I reply, that's kind of like being the sexiest guy in the leper colony. It's something, but it ain't much. And with that, I will turn it over to Representative Mark Higley, who's doing a great job leading the fight against some of this nonsense.
Well, thank you, Rob. And again, a lot different than in New Hampshire. I'm Representative Mark Higley. I represent 8 towns in the Northeast Kingdom along the Canadian border. In 2020, we passed our Global Warming Solutions Act. It includes benchmarks, not goals, which is critical in the sense that we are currently being sued by the Conservation Law Foundation for not meeting those benchmarks in their terms anyway. Again, over the past 2 years, the Climate Council that's been set up by the committee's 23 members have stated that the current plan and suite of plans and actions do not add up to achieving the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And that, again, is included with so much of what I'm going to talk about. As far as just last year, we passed an alternative energy standard. It's going to cost the ratepayers $1 billion over the next 10 years. It was vetoed by the governor, and of course, they overrode his veto on that one. We've got a biomass subcommittee in the Climate Council talking about recommendations to close all biomass facilities. We don't have a lot, but again, it would be devastating to the market for our low-grade timber, for our forest products industry. Rules were implemented by our agency of natural resources to follow California's clean car standards. Again, it looks like Connecticut, Mass, Maine, and Rhode Island are also. There's 17 states total. Again, it's no new internal combustion engines sold in the state of Vermont by 2035. And there's a 35% EV requirement on the lots here in Vermont by the 2026 model year, which is here. Talked to a lot of car dealers. They're really worried. They can't even get the number of vehicles that is being required. They're worried about their dealerships going out of business or being bought up by bigger dealerships because they can't supply the needed vehicles. We did away with our Transportation Climate Initiative years ago because other New England towns didn't sign on. But now we're looking at a new cap and trade investment proposal, which with the taxes, fees, and insurance charges, it could raise the price of a gallon of gas 69 cents by 2030 and 83 cents for diesel and home heating fuel. The list goes on. Again, the alternative energy standard. There's a number of bills that are tied to our climate action plan. One of them is Make Big Oil Pay. Of course, we're the first state. We're always the first state. We're suing the big oil companies. That's, I'm sure, going to be an expensive venture. Just last year, we spent over $524 million on climate action. And a lot of that was federal money. But again, on top of numerous bills that are going to hurt our consumers. So I guess I'll wrap it up there, but certainly appreciate being involved in this group, and thanks for the time.
Thank you, Representative. Paul Craney here. I already kind of spoke. I just want to reiterate that as Attorney General Maria Healey has made her position pretty clear on where she stands on natural gas expansion in Massachusetts. The ironic thing is, as AG 10 years ago, if she didn't stop additional pipelines into New England right now, we could have been benefiting. But as Attorney General and as Governor, her and her administration have had a complete war on natural gas, and we're starting to feel the impact along with the transition that ratepayers are paying for. So I've spoken enough already. I'm going to hand over Chris Carlozzi and then Senator Fattman.
Thank you, Paul. My name is Chris Carlozzi. I'm the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. And, we represent small businesses of all shapes and sizes, all types of industry, manufacturers, wholesale, retail, service. So really a wide range of businesses, but they're all small businesses. And we talk about in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, where I'm State Director, competitiveness, making the state more affordable for businesses to operate and to run. But the policies seem to be doing the opposite of that, making things more expensive for these businesses. It's important for businesses who may be manufacturers. They compete with places all over the country. And some of those are very low cost areas for energy. And that puts businesses in Massachusetts and Rhode Island at a competitive disadvantage. It makes it harder for them to compete with those other businesses in other states. It's important to remember that small businesses need energy choice. They need the ability to use the energy type and source that suits them best. In a state like Massachusetts, we've advanced things like natural gas bans when some businesses rely on that natural gas. Some need those new hookups, and we've made it easier for those communities to say no and made strides to expand those types of bans. So whether you're a manufacturer or a restaurant that needs gas, we're making it harder for those businesses to operate in the state. And I'll go a little further too, to try to meet some of these self-imposed climate goals that the states have put in place. We've done things like the ACT, banning medium and heavy-duty type trucks that many business owners rely on. It makes it more difficult for them to attain those vehicles as we increase the percentage of zero-emission vehicles that are required. That makes it both harder to obtain for the business, also more expensive. And that just means they may be leaving older trucks on the road for longer periods of time because they can't have access to newer vehicles. And of course, in Massachusetts, we also have by 2035 banned the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles in the state. Many small businesses rely on those types of vehicles and their workers to either get to work, deliver a pizza, deliver dry cleaning, bring products to stores. We don't need to make it more expensive, both on energy use, fuel use. Anything we're doing in these states has a really big impact on smaller Main Street businesses. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Senator Ryan Fattman. He's a friend of small business. He represents the Worcester and Hamden Senate District. So I'm going to toss it over to you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Fattman. I have the privilege of serving in the Massachusetts State Senate and representing 19 communities in central Massachusetts. And not a day goes by where we don't get dozens of emails from our constituents about the costs of their energy and electricity. I hold the sole note of having voted against the Climate Act of 2021 that put us on this path to mandating net zero by 2050, and every 5-year in increments having metrics that we must meet or pay the consequences. And as the public consciousness has risen, mostly because their bills have risen. And the premise of this is that 7 million people in Massachusetts are responsible for 7 billion people of the world, despite the fact that we are the third most energy efficient state when it comes to our emissions in the country. We've done a lot of things when this was just a goal, but that all changed in 2021 when we made it mandates. And the consequences are going to be devastating. We have to build out tremendous new infrastructure that's going to cost billions of dollars in order to transition to alternatives and away from clean emission energy like natural gas. One of the consequences and concerns about trying to do that has been referenced. Diesel vehicles are going to be banned in Massachusetts and be unable to be registered in the near future. How are you supposed to build those transmission lines? There's no electric equipment that can last and do that heavy duty type of work. Our biggest consideration is competing with New Hampshire. We've seen most of our residents leave Massachusetts and go to a more affordable state to our north. And we want to build more affordable housing. Well, now we're levying a tax assessment on concrete starting July 1st due to its carbon footprint. We are changing our building code to make it more alternative friendly, which does not make it friendly for affordability. We're requiring every single new house that be built have an electric charging vehicle ability, that they all be wired for solar voltaic panels and have the electrical systems put into place. And that raises the cost of our housing by thousands of dollars, estimates from $30,000 to $70,000, when the average house already costs more than $500,000. This is not affordable. And when people look at their bill, they see all the legislative mandates from EV vehicles to mass save. These are taxes. $4.5 billion of taxes spread out over the ratepayers, and it's only going to get worse. It ranges from naivete of our elected officials who have mandated all of this to narcissism that 7 million people in Massachusetts are responsible for 7 billion people in the world. It's untenable, unaffordable, and it's going to fail unless we change our laws. Paul, thanks for giving me the time and to participate in this. And I stand by that one vote that I was 39-1 that put us on this path, and predict that we're going to revisit that vote in the future as this plays out.
Thank you, Senator. Mike Stenhouse from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Paul. I'm the CEO of the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. I want you to think about this: freezing in the dark. Now, this is not an April Fool's Day joke. If Rhode Island lawmakers don't repeal our many unsustainable net zero alternative energy mandates, not only will electricity continue to rise exorbitantly in prices and become unaffordable, but if we continue to try to mandate electrification of everything, electricity itself may not even be available on the coldest of winter nights. So when you look at your electric bill, as was mentioned earlier, remember it's the policies pushed by the climate alarmists and the agenda-driven elected officials that are causing these high prices, not Rhode Island Energy, not Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission, not federal policies. It's state policies. And the CEO of Rhode Island Energy admitted as much recently on multiple occasions. So we have Rhode Island politicians who brag about our state being the first to set, net zero alternative energy targets by 2050. These are unrealistic. And again, like I said, not only will result in high electricity costs, will also lead to result in unavailability of electricity on our grid, thus freezing in the dark. 3 policy reforms: expand natural gas and nuclear power as sources of energy. They're low carbon, they're reliable, they're low cost, and they're abundant. End the electric vehicle mandate and Rhode Island's blind adherence to California's emission standards, and abolish or delay by many decades at least our state's net zero milestone dates. Now to mention more is our good senator from Rhode Island, Senator Gordon Rogers.
How you doing, everybody? Thanks for the opportunity to speak. There's a lot of stuff that's already been said that I was going to mention. Massachusetts almost took it word for word in some of the stuff I've been saying. Rhode Island's got right about 1 million residents, and they've already spent over $1 billion in the last 10 years, and that's only going to escalate going out on the alternative energy. We have a couple bills in where supermajority, 5 of us voted against the Act on Climate. I actually got a bill in to repeal it. It's not going anywhere, but hopefully it can get a discussion going. We got some transparency bills in, because what I find out in the general public is that the ratepayers are upset and the blame game is everywhere. They're blaming the PUC. They're blaming the electric company. They're blaming everybody, but they're really not blaming where the big problem is. And that's the legislators that put these laws in and pass them. And the ironic part is because I don't think the public is aware of it, and they need to be aware of it. That's why the transparency on the electric bills will help. Is the first people they complain to are the politicians that created the problem that now their ratepayers are complaining to them to, and they want to help and fix this problem and write some bills that probably are going to go nowhere. But at the end of the day, it's bad for business. Any business that's going to move in New England, they're going to do the load calculations, and they're going to calculate what the cost of that business is compared to other states, and it's unattainable. This needs to be turned back. We need to get the general public to understand that it's this alternative energy that is the main driver. The cost of businesses, the cost of residents. And the funny part is when I'm in these committee hearings, when they're pushing all this stuff, the bedfellows are amazing that are on board with this. And I'll name a few. The conservation commissions in the state, the conservation bodies, the Audubon, the land trusts, Labor, AFL-CIO, Save the Bay, and all the politicians. So it's one big machine moving forward. And it really needs to be understood, the direction and the cost of what they're coming from. With that, the next big hammer to drop is going to, as mentioned before, is the new building codes, where we're going to have to require all these buildings to be pre-wired for some things that we may never get. And the infrastructure on the system is going to have to be expanded and increased to take this load. And that reminds me of probably why Rhode Island Energy recently bought into Rhode Island from Pennsylvania, because they understood one of the oldest systems in the country is going to have to be upgraded. And the laws are going to mandate it. And then the Rhode Island Energy is going to have to start upgrading the system, and it's going to cost billions of dollars. And that's where they make most of their money, is capital improvement. And the PUC will not be able to deny it because it's mandated to meet the Act on Climate. So we got a perfect storm coming. It's going to get worse. And hopefully, I know we're on the right side. And we just need to get the voice out. The more these bills go up, the more people are going to have to understand what it's directly related to. And we got to start turning this ship around. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Jacob from Maine Policy Institute.
Morning, everybody. My name is Jake Posick. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs at Maine Policy Institute. I was supposed to be joined by my friend, Representative Reagan Paul. The Maine House is currently debating on the floor one of her bills, I believe it's LD 226, to save Sears Island, which is the Mills administration's preferred location for an offshore wind port. So very relevant to the discussion that we're having here today. I don't have much to say in terms of things that haven't been said already, but to drill in on Maine specifically, we have these far-reaching climate goals in place, and we've had them for many years now. And in fact, a lot of these timelines have been accelerated under the Mills administration. In place today, Maine has goals to consume 100% clean energy by 2040 and net zero emissions goal by 2045. And these goals are really what have justified lawmakers' bad policy decisions over the years. That includes joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, adopting a renewable portfolio standard. Maine currently implements a 100 megawatt cap on energy generation projects with the exception of wind and solar. So not even hydro or nuclear can be constructed at a capacity greater than 100 megawatts currently. We have an expedited wind energy permitting law. A big focus of discussions ongoing in Augusta right now is Maine's net energy billing policy, which props up solar farms all across the state, and it's estimated to cost ratepayers an additional $220 million per year in electricity costs, according to our state's public advocate. And then we also have a nuclear referendum law that prohibits the build out of a nuclear facility unless it's approved by voters in a statewide ballot initiative. So really from top to bottom, there is no free market in Maine, and the system isn't even really built to support all forms of alternative energy. It's really just wind and solar or the highway. Those are your options in Maine. And ratepayers, whether they're individual, commercial, or industrial, they're fed up with the high costs, and those high costs are a direct result of bad statewide energy policy decisions. So that's why Maine Policy is part of this coalition here today, and why we're calling on the Mills administration and lawmakers in Augusta to return the focus and the priority to affordability and reliability for ratepayers. That's what's most important for Maine and the region as a whole. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ross Connolly.
Thanks, Jake, and thanks everyone for participating. I'll be brief so as not to be repetitive. I'm Ross Connolly. I'm the Northeast Regional Director for Americans for Prosperity. So I cover all the New England states, and I'll say with the exception of the great free state of New Hampshire that Majority Leader Osborne laid out, politicians across New England seem to think that the hardworking people in their states are fools because they continue to jam through these mandates, as we've been hearing, that are jacking up rates for ratepayers across New England without regard for the consequences that those policies bring, mainly higher bills and less reliable energy. And just last year in 2024, our sister organization, Americans for Prosperity Foundation, and all of the organizations present here today decided to show what those consequences would be, and they're quite dire. We're talking about 100% increases in bills that people will be receiving over the next decades, $815 billion of more spending across the region just to implement this. So these policies are directly impacting these small business owners, the individuals just trying to scrape by. And all of this spending, all of these mandates, all to pay more for an unreliable grid that will bring with it the threat of rolling blackouts in the coming decades. So the real joke this April Fool's Day is the politicians believing that they can continue to get away with forcing these mandates down the throats of their constituents without having any sort of consequence for those policies. So from our perspective, voters aren't fools. Voters are smart. They see what's happening. They see these bills coming in. They see the higher rates, and they're connecting those policies that are being passed in state houses to the high prices they're seeing in their envelopes on their bills. So we're calling for all politicians across New England to have an abundance mindset. I think Drew was the one that mentioned it, of the coming energy demands over the next decades. To be leaders in technology and energy development, we have to have an abundance mindset focused on affordability and reliability. And with that, I'll kick it back to Paul.
Thank you, Ross. So we are done with our speaking. We're going to open up to Q&A. There's a lot of people here, so media will speak. If you're not media, I ask you please refrain from speaking. Just unmute yourself, ask a question. Obviously, identify who you are, what group you're with. That would be helpful. And if the question is directed to anyone, and we hope to be done in about 10 minutes. Michael Graham, I see your hand up, so go for it.
Yeah, so you keep talking about jamming this in and pushing this through and sticking it through. I lived in Massachusetts. I remember Representative Fattman. There is no sign that the voters of Massachusetts want anything other than what they have right now. They want green energy policies that are virtue signaling. They could give a crap about your math. Is there any evidence, any polling data, anything that shows that any voter is going to move on the issue of energy? And as a codicil, since I moved to New England from down south in 2005, I've been asking this question over and over again. Why aren't Republicans sweeping into state houses in Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire by running on lower energy costs? And the answer is because the voters have factored it in. It's just part of life in New England. It's an expensive place to buy energy. And therefore, there's no will to change the policy. They'd rather say, I like windmills.
So if you don't know, Michael Graham used to be on the radio, if it's not obvious to you. Mike, we just had a poll last week in Massachusetts, statewide poll of likely voters, and it showed that actually there was a preference for expanding natural gas than pursuing alternate energy. So I do think the tide is turning. I know Senator Fattman's getting a lot of feedback on his end. And I would say that if you want to see any type of electoral changes, no better story than Vermont this past year. I believe roughly half of all the Republican legislative pickups in the nation came from Vermont. So they are the tip of the spear probably in New England. So hopefully that answers your question. I do want to keep on moving to some other questions.
Oh, it looks like Allison has a question.
Oh yeah, Allison, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Go for it.
Yes, I just had a question, Paul, for you and also for Senator Fattman. A lot of Democrats are messaging me today concerned about President Trump's tariffs going into effect, I believe, tomorrow. If you guys could help me understand like what the status is of the tariffs as far as Canada and looking at the governor's math, other Democrats being very concerned about what these tariffs will do as far as raising costs. So how you guys would respond if you are in support of the tariffs, if you also have concerns about the tariffs that the president is announcing as far as Canada and oil and petroleum, other factors like that.
I mean, you have to ask, why are we importing fossil fuels when we have one of the largest reserves in Pennsylvania? And as Attorney General, she stopped that pipeline. And as governor, she has worked very hard to make sure that never gets resurrected. So I think it's all on her. As governor of Massachusetts AG, she has stopped the flow of high density, inexpensive natural gas from Pennsylvania. But Senator Fattman, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think the bigger concern needs to go back to 2021, 2022, 2024, all these climate bills that have been passed by almost unanimously by Democrats in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And now the consequences are increased costs. We've seen these mandates that have been put into place for EV vehicle charges on people's electric bills that don't have EV vehicles, for Mass Save, $4.5 billion across the ratepayers for people who don't utilize Mass Save. And so these are the considerations and the consequences of the votes of the Democrats, and they have direct control over it. Let's make that clear. They are directly responsible. They want to point at Eversource, Unitil, National Grid, and the DPU, but their own administration, the Healy administration, has come out and said DPU is not responsible for almost half of the charges that have been placed on the bills. The legislature is. And so, yes, there's always concern about tariffs and energy, but really let's focus on what we can control. And that's our energy policy in Massachusetts. And for that, they're directly responsible.
Senator, but do you support the tariffs that the president is announcing tomorrow, or his planned tariff that he has stalled?
I'm not a big fan of tariffs in general, but I concentrate on what I can concentrate and have direct responsibility on, and that's the policies of Massachusetts. And I don't like tying my future to the state of California as well, which the Commonwealth did. And by the way, our legislature did that. They have no ability to change tariffs. They have a big ability to change our standards for vehicles, for advanced clean technology in vehicles and has heavy duty operating. And the correct question to be asking here is when the governor and other people say, oh, I'm for all of the above. I'm for all of the above when it comes to energy. Well, then why are you putting policies into place that restrict all of the above, number one? And number two, why have you stopped the expansion of clean and affordable energy in the form of natural gas? And now you talk about wanting to be for everything. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. That's the big April Fool's gold joke here today. And that's what you need to concentrate on.
Well, if I could just chime in real quick. This is Drew Klein from the Josiah Bartlett Center in New Hampshire. You can increase prices on energy in a couple of ways. You can restrict the supply, which is what the mid-Atlantic states and the sort of left-leaning other New England states, not named New Hampshire. New Hampshire has done that a little bit too with pipeline restrictions. They've done that for decades by making it difficult, if not impossible, to build the pipelines and the infrastructure to transport cleaner burning American natural gas into New England. So we've been suffering through that for a very long time. Now, going forward, you could add costs, you could tax energy, and that's what a tariff would be on imported Canadian oil or whatever else you want to do. I don't know where that's going to go. Nobody does. But if you tax it, then you're going to also increase the cost. But that's on top of the inflated price that was created by restricting supply. Go back and read ISO New England's reports year after year after year after year after year. They constantly talk about the supply constraints that have been placed on natural gas. We're living with the consequences in New England. I don't want any additional costs posed on top of that, but to speak to Senator Fattman's point, we should focus on what we have control over, which is increasing the supply and not continuing to constrain it.
Thank you, Drew. We do have a question from Marian Wasser. So Marian's, if you can just unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, I'm just curious what evidence you have that removing these mandates at the legislature would lead to more affordable energy. Nuclear is obviously very expensive and seems really challenging to site. Gas infrastructure costs have also spiked in recent years and suffer from a lot of the same supply and inflation issues that have plagued offshore wind and other renewables. Pipelines are hard to site too. I guess I'm just curious why you believe removing these renewable energy mandates would suddenly make energy super cheap in the region.
Well, I mean, I think almost all of us can answer that question, but I know all the nonprofit organizations here co-authored a study last November that actually put numbers behind some of these mandates. So if you don't have a copy of that, we could certainly share that with you. I believe Ross spoke about that. $815 billion is the expected cost for these mandates on the ratepayers.
Yeah, and I want to clarify. I misspoke earlier. I think I said New Hampshire not imposing such heavy mandates saved us $56.5 million. It's $56.5 billion going forward. So I would definitely check out our study on that.
Is that question specific to any particular state? Because one thing I would say that's evidence for Maine, and I had mentioned it briefly in my comments, Maine has a net energy billing policy. Anybody who is subscribed to one of our transmission and distribution utilities, like Central Maine Power, for example, it literally says on your bill up to 15% of your cost of electricity delivery to your home is due to state public policy initiatives, including net energy billing. So the state's public advocate in Maine, anyway, has determined that it costs ratepayers $220 million a year. Ratepayers in Maine could save $220 million a year collectively if the state repealed that policy. So that's the one that would come top to mind for my state anyway, in terms of eliminating mandates.
And I'll just
I'd
say,
also like to.
sorry, I'll just say real quick from my end. I think in that study, and I saw Drew dropped a link to the study in the chat if you want to check it out. A great example of this is New Hampshire, who does not have any of these energy mandates. If it weren't for New Hampshire, the overall price across the New England grid would be more expensive. So the state that isn't putting forward mandates is lowering the cost currently for the states that do have these ridiculous climate goals.
Senator Fattman, do you want to?
Yeah, my point about mandates is that I think goals would be a good option. You want to achieve something, you want to get somewhere, make it a goal. When you mandate something, if you don't meet those, there's two consequences. One, government comes in and reduces freedom, and they put in a stick as opposed to a carrot. What are some of those sticks in Massachusetts? Well, our building code is changing to go in a way that we heat our homes electric, and failure to do so creates consequences. For example, you want to retrofit your home, you want to add in an in-law apartment. Well, according to our new building code, in many instances, you have to retrofit your house before you can get a permit for said in-law apartment. So before you ever put shovel in the ground, you have to spend $30,000 to $70,000 electrifying your home and putting in an electric charging port for an electric car you don't have, putting in and wiring electric solar voltaic panels for those that you don't have. Oh, and then you can get your permit to build an in-law apartment for mom and pop who are aging, therefore slowing the ability and increasing the cost of housing. We put a charge on now cement, which if we had put in place the mandate of diesel vehicles, you couldn't get a new cement pour to pour that cement for a foundation of a home. The technology is not there, and the mandates are increasing the pressure to the point of bursting on costs and pain. And that's why I think going to goals, which we used to have in the Commonwealth, were better. And right now we're looking at home heating taxes. They're developing a home heating clean standard. So if you don't participate and you have oil or gas, you're going to see taxes levied on top of that. We have a large building energy review going on right now where any building in the Commonwealth, 20,000 square feet, is going to be incentivized or taxed to move in the direction of electric as opposed to how they energize it currently now. And so those are going to be consequences due to mandates. And I think it gives us less flexibility as policymakers, and it ties our hands. And that to me is not appropriate, especially when it's unelected people who are making those decisions and elected people giving them the power.
Thank you, Senator. I'm very mindful of everyone's time. I would say one last question from media, then we're going to conclude. Lori from Bangor Daily News.
Yes, thank you. With the aging grid and the demand for more electricity, how able is the current infrastructure to handle the increase in demand for electricity going forward?
I'm not sure. Is there anybody who particularly wants to handle that? That's something that I'm not sure off the top of my head. What I would say though is, as I mentioned in my comments, I think that there's a lot more that Maine can do to bring on, other forms of energy that sort of fit the bill for moving in the alternative or renewable or clean direction that the state wants to move in, but unfortunately, they're sort of locked out from doing so. The two that are chief of mind to me would be hydro and nuclear. And I know that there's bills pending in the legislature that relate to those things. I know that there's other states in the region, Connecticut, who I don't believe is necessarily represented here, but are they? Is somebody, Paul from Connecticut here? But I know that they, for example, in Massachusetts as well, has sort of considered looking at sort of a supplemental clean energy standard. There's a bill pending in the legislature related to that right now that would allow some of these forms of energy that do not produce emissions to be included. And so I think for Maine and for the region broadly, it should be an all of the above approach that focuses on affordability and reliability for ratepayers. But I can't speak, knowledgeably to the age of the infrastructure. Perhaps there's somebody here who's better equipped for that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a question for the industry itself. But I do want to wrap it up. It is April Fool's Day, so we don't want the ratepayers to be fooled by why their costs are going up, just to reiterate that. Thank you everyone for joining. Media, if you have any follow-up questions, just reach out. We'll direct it to the right people. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.